The Gospel is traditionally referred to as the proof text with regard to the two ways, the common way and the direct way unto glory. The way of the evangelical councils is sometimes referred to as the cursus rectus ad Deum, the direct course. Why? Because all the distractions, the comings and goings, the leakages of energy are radically pruned. And so, as St. Paul points out in the first epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 7, the person is more free. His heart and mind are not divided. It is a huge benefit for the Church to have people of that caliber at the exclusive service of God and His people without the divided heart which marriage does involve. The heart and the mind are thinly spread quite often when a person has a lot of family issues to handle. My best friend was the son of the vicar of Cardiff, and he himself is a vicar himself, and I know it's not so simple. And so, if it's taken seriously as an invitation for exclusive love for Jesus, it's hugely freeing. Having said that, I want to zoom into one or two things which concern both our relationship with each other and our relationship with the Lord in the context specifically of this feast day, which is that of St. Pius X. He is known for his work on several levels. First of all, his resistance to modernism, which is why the Society of St. Pius X, the one that came from the split with Monsignor Lefebvre, took this saint as the patron precisely to combat modernism, which has come back in a new form. But then the other thing also is capital. It's what he did toward the beginning of the liturgical movement. He was a person who was grounded in reality, from a simple background, formed in a seminary and put in a parish. And he realized at first hand the centrality of the place of worship in the life of the parish and of the souls of the people therein. It was the place of encounter. Encountering the Father, they were encountering each other, and it was not a place to be doing their own devotions, each one alone in a bubble, but to be saying what the Church wanted them to say, at least with their mind, to engage with the prayer of the Church. And it was the remote beginnings of the liturgical movement that we have now, still ongoing in a sense, because Pope Benedict wanted, as it were, a new liturgical movement to make a reform of the reform. That is to say, to re-establish in the correct line what the correct intuitions of the fathers of the liturgical movement were, which unfortunately were to some extent, not entirely, hijacked by people who had a certain influence after the council, which took it in a more Protestant direction than had been the anticipation of the council fathers. Now, with regard to this early stage, he saw that Holy Communion was important. In the beginning of the 1900s, there were still strong vestiges of Jansenism in some parts of the world, in France notably, and Holy Communion was quite rare. We have already the Lord's own reaction to that in the series of events at Parémonial, when he wanted people to come more willingly and more warmly to him in Holy Communion. Remember that when he asked for a monthly communion on the first Friday, it meant that that wasn't the case. The people were not going once a month. So in that context, it was an innovation. But still here, people were aware of the centrality of the Eucharist and would be afraid to approach. And he knew the importance of children, that they were to be taught a delicate and intimate form of union with Jesus, and actually partly through the story of little Nellie of Holy God here in Ireland, he brought in the discipline of Holy Communion for children. When I was in Italy, I noticed that the senior citizens in the country would tell me that they had their first Holy Communion and their confirmation on the same day. And the simple reason was they couldn't afford it otherwise. It was a big event and that's all they could manage. Interesting. The First Communion then was anticipated. It was actually an innovation insofar as it separated the union between those two as yet uncelebrated parts of initiation, which were confirmation and communion. In the East, all the sacraments of initiation are given to the child, and therefore every parish priest can confirm. They call it chrismation. And they receive Holy Communion immediately, and actually only children in practice receive Holy Communion on a Sunday in the Eastern Church, massively in the parishes. The adults are quite afraid. That's a little parenthesis, but we had, until Pius X, still that link between confirmation and Holy Communion, but therefore we're having, from that point onwards, a three-stage development in initiation: baptism for the baby, Holy Communion now for the child at the age of reason, and then confirmation later on. And there, again, that differs slightly from one country to another. In Ireland, it's actually quite early compared with Italy. In Italy, they were tending to be little adults by that stage, sort of 15, 16. Now, all this to say that it had an impact on the Church's life massively. And actually, if one talks to somebody of the Eastern Rite, I mean Eastern Orthodox now, not just Eastern Rite, Eastern Orthodox, you will see that one thing they actually admire with Roman Catholic practice, secretly, is the fact that we have access to the young people for longer than they do at crucial periods, because we oblige them to come back for these sacraments at different stages, and also for future couples getting married. So this is something they are interested in, because in practice they've given everything in one go, and so the rest maybe will just be fading away. With regard to the other thing that this saint was important in working upon, it was the very life of the Church in liturgy itself. He was behind a massive putting in place of restoration. Concretely, the work of restoration of the authentic chant of the Church was handed over to the monks of Solesmes, big French house. And they worked on it for years, and we're still using now the fruit of their work. Actually, even in the Hermitage, it's their own work. It's the official Latin Gregorian of the Church, and it's a good version. Because there had been corruptions coming in over the centuries, and also it had to be worked upon in such a way that the people could participate. And so we have this two-tier system, that a choir would be formed, and he worked on this himself as parish priest, who would sing the bits that change, what we call the proper, and the people would sing the bits that don't. Actually at Johnstown, that bit we've got to some extent, because the people do actually alternate with me the Latin which they know. We always keep the same chants for that reason, the Mass of the Angels. But then I sing the bits in between, which only if one knows one can do, because one has to sight read Gregorian, but it's something one is learning as a monk all the time. That's why, by the way, if one chooses not to continue in a monastery to use Gregorian chant, it's a big decision. It won't come back, because one just breathes it day and night and learns to sight read by hearing it. It's not difficult, it's just a question of learning it from hearing it every day. So this then was also important, because it meant that from having a church full of people who were in the pews, kneeling, saying the rosary and letting it happen, they were actually going to start participating. Now, he was the one who coined this famous expression, active participation, which came through the century and was embedded in the Second Vatican Council's document on liturgy itself, Sacrosanctum Concilium, the first document published in Vatican II. However, his meaning was not actually what we think it means. It meant, yes, that there should be participation vocally and gesturally in what was going on, but it was more, and this bit is forgotten, because the thrust of the liturgical movement was not in the first instance that of changing liturgy itself, but of changing people's attitude to it. And therefore, a more correct translation of the Latin participatio actuosa would, according to experts, be actual participation and not active participation, because actual means the engaging of the mind and soul. This matters because, in the interest of a misconception, people have got the notion now that active participation means the physical engagement of the maximum number of people to do some bit. It's not actually what it's about, because there can be more actual participation if there's less misconceived active participation happening all the time, which impedes quite often the other. E.g., Pope Benedict, who is a good musician, has tongue-in-cheek one teaching about the way in which to involve everyone in obligatory active participation in music, get everyone to sing. By doing so, rather than having access to now and again a beautiful scholar singing perfect harmony correctly, having to oblige everyone to benefit from one's awful voice, that means that we're actually impeding the actual participation, because we want this active participation which is raucous and awful. So this is what we're at. Actually in Ireland we're not even at that, because if one goes to the average parish in Ireland, one will not even be given a hymn book. It will be expected that if there's any singing going on, it will be done from the gallery or elsewhere. So it's not actually that much further ahead. It's just this change in nature. In other countries, it is very different. If one celebrates in France or Italy, they will actually sing with you. They will be glad to sing with you, and they're not, in the first instance, concerned about the time one is taking. All the Sunday celebrations in France, including Saturday evening, last an hour, and they're fully sung. But there'll be fewer of them, because the priests will not binate, or certainly not trinate. That is the difference. In other countries, notably English-speaking countries, America, and by now England, it wasn't the case when I was a child, there's been a cross-fertilization between certain cultures and an influence of Protestantism, which has meant that Catholics have had to be aware of their brothers next to them who have high quality, and therefore women find celebrations going on for longer in America and in England compared with Ireland, and more singing going on in them, and also more participation in that singing. Now I just want to zoom into one specific thing. It's the question of relationship between how we enter into communion with each other through the sacramentality of certain things, and how we enter into God in communion through another sacramentality. The divine is directly sacramental in the full sense of the word, but the human participates in it also. As with our contact with God, it's going to be more intensely actual if it's fully engaging. And therefore, when it's not involved in distraction, because to be intimate, there has to be a certain absence of being obliged to think about things around the one we're trying to approach. Now this matters, because when liturgy becomes its own center of attention, then one is not free to rest on the Lord. one is thinking about what is serving the Lord in the liturgy, but one is not actually free to rest in the Lord. That only happens when one is in a certain automatic mode, e.g. in a monastic situation where liturgy is beautiful but automatic. One doesn't think about it, one is carried by it, one is rocked by the chant automatically. So too, liturgy, to be freeing, must have been over a long period enriched in such a way that it's no longer drawing attention to itself but happening. And also, by being known, is being participated in. Therefore, a certain repetitivity and a knowledge of certain things in the repertoire well known, e.g. Taizé chants, able to pick up, that can happen and should happen, but there has to be a starting point. Actually, the Church wanted this to happen with the publication of the new Missal by putting in the Missal the very chants. We're using them here. All is sung, but using what's in the Missal, essentially. It's actually printed. Now, the other thing is this, in parallel, something of that is true also when we engage with each other. We have the sacramentality of the soul, which is the body. Now, the body has its language. There is a more intense communion between souls when there is a certain simplicity and silence. And the body in that has its role. One hears the person more when one does not need to speak. One feels the presence of the person more when one is close to the person in trust. One rests upon the soul via the body, and there's a warmth of communication between the limbs. So too, the sacramental sphere is specifically Catholic with God. We're not brain only. Our body enters into it. And therefore, to make abstraction of the body in favour of some kind of Protestant glorious head worship only is to miss the grace of our faith. What am I saying? We need to cultivate two things in parallel. We meet well when we meet together our God. It matters in community. It matters certainly in marriage. There can be no serious Christian marriage if we can't share Jesus together. But it matters also with regard to our entering into church together. We love and we meet, but for that to happen, we disappear. And what better ministry than to create an atmosphere in which that can happen? So I propose to you one thing to conclude. A genuine, active stroke actual participation might be, rather than everyone doing something all the time and being visible, seen doing something all the time, would be perhaps to have the ministry of, in an invisible place and mode, creating an atmosphere where everyone can be free. Music ministry is what we need, not 20 Eucharistic ministers, because they impede the time the Lord needs to get through to his people. Proportionately, it's the most important part, that part, and we make it just the tail end. And the notices are actually more important, it would seem. Whereas a true participation might be to train even young people to get involved with the time-consuming preparation of liturgy, which can also be extended to preparation of the Word. Combine the two, it's perfect. And then, not being clapped or visible, offering a space where Jesus can get through to his people, and the people also can get through to each other. We are healed by an atmosphere of glory and harmony. And more of the same, what we had in the week, is not going to uplift us one little bit. Touch. To know that there is presence in a hand, and mingled mind in sharing of a heat, that in the chill of chaos two can stand unharmed, and with a smile great sadness greet, that
when we seem but specks of cosmic dust, or ants unknown, soon trodden underfoot. There is a care somewhere for what yet must be there, for one, just one, that understood. This is to know that there are many things of weight that can weigh less than something small, so small that imperceptibly it clings amid a ruin huge that ruins all. But this small clinging holds a soul to soul, at touching pores that keep two fragments whole.